The T-Rex was huge, at least 9 feet tall at the shoulder, and its crimson scales shimmered like molten lava under the neon lights of New Orion's market district. Kale Draven crouched behind a half-melted hover car, his pulse pounding in time with the creature's thudding steps. It snarled, nostrils flaring as it scented the air. The market was in shambles, abandoned in the wake of the beast's rampage. Scorched awnings hung in tatters, overturned stalls spilled exotic wares into the streets. Kale wiped sweat from his brow, the faint hum of his gauntlet knife vibrating through his palm. "You've really outdone yourself this time, Draven," he muttered under his breath. The T-Rex let out a guttural roar, shattering a vendor's fruit cart with one swing of its tail. Its massive head jerked toward Kale's position. "Oh, for the love of—" Kale leapt from cover as the hover car exploded behind him, blown apart by the beast's rage. He hit the ground rolling, coming up with his gauntlet knife extended. The blade pulsed with an electric blue glow as he slashed at the T-Rex's leg, aiming for the joint. The beast bellowed, more annoyed than injured, and spun with surprising speed for its size. Its tail lashed out, catching Kale square in the chest. He flew backward, slamming into a wall with a sickening crunch. Groaning, Kale staggered to his feet. His ribs screamed in protest, but he had no time to dwell on the pain. The T-Rex was charging, its jaws wide enough to swallow him whole. "Kale, you're going to get yourself killed out there," came a voice crackling through his comm. "Thanks for the vote of confidence, Milo," Kale grunted, sidestepping the charge at the last second. The T-Rex crashed into the wall, leaving a crater where Kale had stood. "Maybe next time you can give me advice before I sign up for a job like this?" Milo, a herbivore courier with an overly cautious streak, chuckled nervously. "I told you, man, T-Rex jobs aren't worth it. Too much ego, too many teeth." Kale smirked despite himself. "Yeah, well, the paycheck says otherwise." The T-Rex turned again, slower this time, blood dripping from the shallow wound Kale had managed to inflict earlier. It bared its dagger-like teeth and charged once more. Kale activated the grappling line on his gauntlet, firing it at a nearby lamppost. The line caught, yanking him skyward just as the beast's jaws snapped shut beneath him. Swinging onto the lamppost, Kale steadied himself and drew a small, cylindrical device from his belt. "Last chance, big guy," he called down. "Stand down, or I bring you down." The T-Rex snarled, its tail whipping dangerously close to the lamppost. "Yeah, didn't think so." Kale activated the device, throwing it directly at the T-Rex's feet. The electronet expanded mid-air, wrapping around the creature and delivering a series of high-voltage shocks. The T-Rex roared in fury, thrashing against the net, but its movement slowed as the shocks took effect. Finally, with a ground-shaking thud, it collapsed. Kale jumped down, landing heavily beside the unconscious beast. He took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Job's done," he said into the comm. "You're insane, you know that?" Milo replied, "Yeah, but I'm alive. That counts for something." Kale didn't have time to celebrate. The sound of footsteps, light, quick, and calculated, echoed through the empty market. He turned, knife at the ready, as a group of raptors emerged from the shadows. Well, if it isn't Kale Draven," said the leader, a sleek, scarred raptor with piercing yellow eyes. "You've been busy." "Sorry, did I interrupt your dinner plans?" Kale quipped, though his grip tightened on the knife. "You've got a lot of nerve," the raptor growled, circling him. "Running around, playing mercenary, when everyone knows you're a mutt." The word hit harder than Kale expected. He kept his face neutral, but inside, a familiar anger flared. "Look, I don't know what you've heard," he said, "but I'm not interested in faction politics. I'm just here for the paycheck." The raptor's eyes narrowed. "You're a traitor to your kind, if you even have one." Before Kale could respond, the raptor lunged. Kale sidestepped, bringing his knife up to block, but another raptor attacked from the other side. Claws slashed across his arm, drawing blood. Kale fought back, his movements a blur of precision and desperation. He took down 2 raptors with a series of well-placed strikes, but the rest closed in. Enough. The command came from the shadows, a sharp, authoritative voice that froze the raptors in their tracks. A figure stepped forward, a tall, lithe woman with dark hair and a cold, calculating gaze. She wasn't a raptor, she wasn't any gene warrior Kale recognized. Who the hell are you? Kale demanded, breathing heavily. The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. A friend. For now. The raptors stepped back, clearly deferring to her. Kale kept his knife raised. What do you want? Not what I want, she said. What the world needs. Kale snorted. Yeah, I've heard that before. The woman's expression hardened. You're not just anyone, Draven. You're a hybrid. And whether you like it or not, you're the only one who can stop this war before it destroys everything. Kale stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He wanted to laugh, to call her crazy. But deep down, he knew she was right. For years, he'd tried to outrun his past, to live as if he wasn't caught between 2 worlds. But the war was getting worse, spilling into civilian zones, threatening the fragile peace of New Orion, and Kale Draven, the reluctant hybrid, might just be the only one who could end it. Kale studied the woman, every muscle in his body tense. The raptors hadn't left, their eyes sharp and predatory as they loomed just beyond her. His knife remained in his hand, its faint electric hum a reminder of how close he was to needing it again. Let me guess, he said finally. You're here to tell me I've got a destiny or some nonsense like that? Her smile flickered, brief and sharp like a blade in the dark. Hardly. I'm here because you're useful. The factions can't see past their bloodlines, their petty wars, but you. You're something they can't ignore. A hybrid with both T-Rex and raptor genes? You're a walking impossibility. Kale's grip tightened. He didn't like how casually she talked about his genes, like he was a specimen under a microscope. And you are? Dr. Evelyn Chorus, she said, folding her arms. You've probably heard of me. He had. Every gene warrior had. She was the architect of their existence, the scientist who had unlocked the secrets of dinosaur DNA and fused them with humanity. Her name was spoken in reverence and hatred, depending on who you asked. You've got some nerve showing your face here, Kale said. A lot of people blame you for this mess. Let them, Evelyn said coolly. Blame doesn't interest me. Survival does. And if we don't act fast, no one, human or gene warrior, will have that luxury. Kale's ribs still ached, and the blood dripping from his arm was starting to irritate him. He shook his head. Look, I appreciate the dramatic entrance, but I'm not interested in your crusade. I've got my own problems. Evelyn tilted her head, her gaze piercing. And what do you think happens when this war spills over? Do you really think you'll be able to stay out of it? The Paleogene Order is already positioning themselves to wipe out every gene warrior on the planet. They've got the factions dancing to their tune, keeping each other weak while they prepare to unleash their doomsday weapon. It's called the Extinction Protocol. Sound familiar? Kale stiffened. He had heard whispers, rumors in the underground about a weapon capable of erasing every gene warrior in existence. He hadn't believed it, but now, staring at Evelyn, he wasn't so sure. And you think I can stop it? He asked, skepticism thick in his voice. I don't think, Evelyn said. I know. You're the only one with ties to both the raptors and the T-Rexes. You've got the strength to stand toe-to-toe with either side, and you've got the perspective to see what they don't, that this war is a trap. Kale opened his mouth to argue, but a low growl from one of the raptors cut him off. He glanced around. They were still watching, still waiting for an excuse to pounce. Evelyn noticed his hesitation. This isn't just about you, Kale. Think about the people caught in the crossfire. How many more markets like this one will burn before it's over? How many more innocent lives will be lost? Milo's face flashed in Kale's mind, the nervous grin the herbivore courier always wore when he joked about Kale's reckless jobs. Kale exhaled slowly, his resolve hardening. "Fine," he said. "I'll hear you out." "But if this is some kind of setup..." "It's not," Evelyn interrupted. She gestured to the raptors. "We've got a lot to discuss. Let's move before the Dominion's trackers catch up." Kale followed reluctantly, keeping his knife ready. He had a feeling this was going to be a long night. Hours later, Kale found himself in a dimly lit safe house buried beneath the city. Evelyn had led him there after shaking off the raptors, who had scattered into the shadows like ghosts. The room was sparse: metal walls, a battered table, and a flickering holoscreen that cast strange shadows. Evelyn leaned against the table, studying Kale as if deciding how much to tell him. "The factions are tearing each other apart," she began. "The Tyrannosaur Dominion and the Raptor Syndicate are the worst offenders, but the Herbivore Coalition isn't innocent either. They all think they're fighting for dominance, but the truth is, they're being manipulated." "By the Paleogene Order," Kale said. Evelyn nodded. "They've been orchestrating this war from the beginning. Every battle, every assassination, every escalation, it's all part of their plan to weaken the Gene Warriors and position themselves as humanity's saviors. And now, they're close to launching the Extinction Protocol." Kale frowned. "Why tell me this? Why not go to one of the faction leaders?" "Because they'd never listen," Evelyn said. "Tyrus Varric? Silva Quinn? They're too wrapped up in their own power struggles to see the bigger picture. But you can force them to listen. You can unite them." Kale laughed bitterly. "Unite them? Are you serious? The raptors tried to kill me this morning. The T-Rexes would probably finish the job if they had the chance." "That's because they see you as a threat," Evelyn said. "But threats can become allies when the stakes are high enough. And believe me, Kale, the stakes don't get any higher than extinction." Kale ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. He didn't want to believe her, but deep down, he knew she was right. The war was spiraling out of control, and if what she said about the Extinction Protocol was true, they didn't have much time. "What's the plan?" he asked finally. Evelyn smiled, but there was no triumph in it. Only grim determination. "We start with the Syndicate. Silva Quinn is dangerous, but she's pragmatic. If we can convince her that the Extinction Protocol is a bigger threat than the Dominion, she might be willing to talk. From there, we bring Tyrus Varric to the table. And if all else fails," Kale raised an eyebrow. "What?" "We make them listen," Evelyn said. Kale wasn't sure what that meant, but he had a feeling he wouldn't like it. The Syndicate's territory was a maze of crumbling buildings and narrow alleys, lit by the faint glow of bioluminescent graffiti. Kale and Evelyn moved quietly, their steps muffled by the layer of grime coating the streets. "They'll know we're here before we even get close to Silva," Kale whispered. "Good," Evelyn said. "Let them." Kale didn't have time to question her. A figure emerged from the shadows ahead, a raptor, its sleek body coiled like a spring ready to pounce. More followed, their claws clicking softly against the pavement. "Draven," the lead raptor said, its voice low and mocking. "What brings you to our neck of the woods?" Kale kept his expression neutral. "I need to speak to Silva. It's important." The raptor's eyes narrowed. "And why would we let you do that?" Evelyn stepped forward, her voice sharp and commanding. "Because if you don't, the Syndicate dies along with the rest of us." The raptors hesitated, glancing at each other. Then, without a word, they stepped aside. Kale shot Evelyn a look. "Remind me never to play poker with you." She didn't respond, her focus fixed on the path ahead. As they entered the heart of the Syndicate's stronghold, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, and that the battles ahead would test him in ways he wasn't prepared for. Silva Quinn's throne was as sharp and calculated as she was, crafted from salvaged steel and bones of long-forgotten prey. It dominated the Syndicate's war room. Her piercing green eyes locked on Kale as he stepped into her domain, flanked by Evelyn and the raptors who had reluctantly escorted them in. She sat with an air of casual authority, legs crossed, a wickedly curved blade resting in her lap like an extension of her own predatory nature. "Kale Draven," Silva drawled, her voice smooth and dangerous. "I'd say it's a surprise seeing you here, but you always did have a knack for showing up where you don't belong." Kale raised an eyebrow. "Good to see you too, Silva. Love what you've done with the place." Silva's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Flattery doesn't suit you, Kale. Now tell me why you're really here before I decide to let my friends outside finish what they started." Evelyn stepped forward, her presence as sharp as a scalpel. "He's here because you're running out of time, Silva. We all are." Silva's gaze shifted to Evelyn, her expression hardening. "And who might you be?" "Dr. Evelyn Chorus," she said, her tone clipped. "The one who made you what you are. And the one who can help you stay alive, if you're willing to listen." Silva's smile vanished. The tension in the room thickened, the surrounding raptors stiffening at the mention of Evelyn's name. Kale could feel the temperature drop, the air electric with the threat of violence. For a moment, he wondered if Evelyn had just signed their death warrants. "You've got guts showing your face here," Silva said, her voice low and venomous. "Do you have any idea how many of us died because of your little experiments?" "I do," Evelyn said, meeting Silva's gaze without flinching. "And I'm trying to stop more from dying. That's why I'm here." Silva studied her for a long moment, then shifted her focus back to Kale. "And you're with her? Didn't peg you for a scientist's lapdog." Kale clenched his jaw. "I'm not anyone's lapdog. I'm here because there's a bigger threat than your feud with the Dominion. The Paleogene Order has a weapon designed to wipe out every gene warrior on the planet. And unless we work together to stop them, we're all dead." Silva leaned back in her throne, her expression unreadable. "The Paleogene Order? Haven't heard that name in a while. Thought they were just a ghost story." "They're real," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "And they've been pulling the strings behind this war from the beginning." Silva's fingers drummed against the arm of her throne, the only sign that she was considering their words. "Even if I believed you, why should I care? The Syndicate's been fighting for survival since day one. We don't need your help." "You do if you want to survive the extinction protocol," Kale said. "This isn't about territory or power anymore. It's about whether any of us are still here when the dust settles." Silva's eyes narrowed. "And what's in it for you, Draven? Don't tell me you're doing this out of the kindness of your heart." Kale hesitated, then said, "I'm tired of running. Tired of watching innocent people get caught in the crossfire. If I can stop that, I will." Silva studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment, then let out a low chuckle. "You always were an idealist. Fine. I'll hear you out. But if this is a trap, I'll make sure you regret it." Kale nodded, relief washing over him. "It's not. You'll see." Evelyn stepped forward again, pulling a small holodevice from her pocket. She activated it, projecting a map of the city with several key locations highlighted. "This is where the Paleogene Order is operating. They're using the Dominion and the Syndicate to keep each other distracted while they finalize their weapon. If we can hit their key facilities and disrupt their operations, we'll have a chance to stop the protocol." Silva leaned forward, her interest piqued. "And what exactly do you need from us?" "Manpower," Evelyn said. "Resources. Intelligence. We can't do this alone." Silva's eyes flicked to Kale. "And you're expecting me to just trust you?" "I'm expecting you to trust that you want to survive," Kale said. "Because if we don't stop this, none of us will." Silva's lips curved into a faint smile, her sharp teeth glinting in the dim light. "You've got nerve, Draven. I'll give you that." "Fine. I'll give you what you need." But if this goes sideways, don't expect any mercy. Kale nodded. Fair enough. The syndicate's support turned the tide. With Silva's resources and her network of informants, Kale and Evelyn were able to pinpoint the Paleogene Order's key operations. The first target was a supply depot on the outskirts of the city, where the Order was stockpiling components for the Extinction Protocol. Kale led the strike team, a mix of Raptors and Syndicate operatives. The mission was supposed to be quick and quiet, but as they approached the depot, it became clear that the Paleogene Order had anticipated their move. The depot was heavily guarded, drones patrolling the perimeter and gun turrets stationed at key choke points. This is going to be messy, Kale muttered, crouching behind a rusted cargo container as he surveyed the depot through a pair of binoculars. Messy is what we're good at, Silva said, crouching beside him with a predatory grin. Kale couldn't help but smirk. Let's hope you're right. The attack began with precision strikes, the Raptors moving like shadows as they took out the perimeter guards. Kale led the charge into the depot, his gauntlet knife cutting through the opposition with ruthless efficiency. The Syndicate operatives covered him, their weapons lighting up the night as they engaged the Paleogene forces, but as the battle raged, it became clear that the depot was more than just a supply hub. Deep within the facility, they discovered a laboratory filled with equipment and specimens that chilled Kale to the core. Tanks filled with viscous fluid lined the walls, each one containing a grotesque amalgamation of human and dinosaur DNA. What the hell is this? Kale muttered, staring at the nearest tank. The creature inside twitched, its half-formed limbs pressing against the glass. Experiments, Evelyn said, her voice tight. They're trying to create their own hybrids. To replace you. Kale's stomach turned, but there was no time to dwell on it. The facility's alarms blared, signaling reinforcements. Kale barked orders, rallying his team as they fought their way out of the lab. Explosions rocked the depot as Silva's operatives planted charges, ensuring that the facility, and the horrors it contained, would be destroyed. By the time they returned to the Syndicate's stronghold, Kale was exhausted, his body battered and his mind racing. But there was no time to rest. The war was far from over, and the next battle loomed on the horizon.